I was talking to a commercial pilot recently, a guy named Dakota, who has built his entire livelihood on a single line of technology. He showed me his workshop, and it's like a physical timeline of the last decade. Every single iteration of the DJI Phantom drone, from the original V1 all the way to the latest flagship. For him, these aren't just toys. They are high-precision tools. He uses them to inspect power lines and map out massive construction sites. He's always been the first in line for the next upgrade, always waiting for that next leap in battery life or camera stability. But as we stood there, the conversation took a sharp turn. His usual excitement for the next big thing was just gone, replaced by this look of genuine frustration. Because for the first time since he started his business, that timeline on his shelf is hitting a dead end. This past Monday, the federal government effectively closed the curtains on the future of drone flight in America. By labeling foreign-made drones and their components an unacceptable risk to national security, the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, has placed them on a federal blacklist. The name DJI wasn't written in the headlines, but the message was heard loud and clear by every pilot in the country. The world's most popular drones are no longer welcome on U.S. shelves. And what's striking is the sheer chasm between two different Americas right now. On one side, you have the Drone Advocacy Alliance and thousands of small business owners who are, in their own words, beyond furious. They're looking at American-made alternatives that cost 4 times as much, but offer, half the performance. They feel like they're being forced to pay a premium for a downgrade. Then on the other side, you have a group of domestic startups and lobbyists, some with high-profile political advisors on their boards, who are practically celebrating. They're calling this a historic decision that will force the rebirth of the American drone industry. It leaves us with this bizarre, contradictory reality. While Washington labels this tech a dire threat to our safety, local police departments are still using these exact same drones to find missing hikers and rescue children from floodwaters. It forces a question that goes beyond simple security. Is this ban actually about protecting our data? Or is it about clearing the skies for a domestic industry that simply can't compete on its own? That opening anecdote really captures the tension at the heart of this deep dive. We're watching a high-stakes collision between, long-term national security policy, economic self-interest, and the immediate practical needs of thousands of commercial operators, people like Dakota. The mission today is to unpack this specific federal action, how the ban works, why it creates this immediate economic friction, and whether this move, which looks a lot like protectionism, can achieve its stated goals, especially when the domestic alternatives are still lagging so far behind.
Right. And to understand the immediate impact, you have to look past the political headlines and straight into the regulatory mechanics. This isn't a ban that immediately grounds every unmanned aircraft system, or UAS, flying today. It's far more subtle and, I'd say, structural. On December 23, 2025, the FCC added foreign-made UAS and specific critical components, chiefly the radio frequency, or RF, devices, to its national security covered list.
Okay, so the government isn't saying the drones currently in the air are illegal. It's targeting the process that enables the next generation of them.
Right.
What is the precise regulatory choke point here?
The choke point is the mandatory FCC equipment authorization. It's a critical step.
For everything, right? Not just drones.
For everything. Every electronic device that transmits radio signals, from your cell phone to a drone controller, it has to receive FCC authorization before it can be legally imported, marketed, or sold in the U.S. By placing these foreign-made systems on the covered list, the FCC is simply refusing to grant that authorization to any new models or revised configurations from those designated companies. And that explicitly includes market leaders like DJI and Autel.
That seems like such a small detail, but it has these huge cascading implications. It means existing, previously authorized drones are still legal to sell and fly. The Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, hasn't restricted current recreational or Part 107, that's commercial operations for drones already in use. So Dakota can keep flying his current hardware. For now.
That's absolutely correct, but this is why we call it the ban on keeping up.
Right.
It's essentially a guaranteed obsolescence timeline. In the consumer electronics world, product life cycles are measured in months, not years, and the mandatory certification is tied to an exact hardware configuration. The specific model of radio chip, the antenna array, the processor, every single piece.
So if any one of those tiny components goes end of life...
And they constantly do. If a component goes end of life, the manufacturer has to make what we call a silent revision to their hardware.
An engineer needs to swap out an obsolete chip for a newer one, even if the user, never notices a performance change.
Precisely. That simple swap, that minor configuration change, legal requires a new FCC certification. But because the manufacturer is on the covered list, They can't get that new certification.
So the product line is just frozen in time.
Exactly. Blocking that new certification means the product line stops evolving, it stops being maintainable, and eventually it stops shipping new units to the US. The government is essentially freezing innovation in place for the largest section of the US market.
This sounds like a slow, deliberate regulatory strangulation. If we look at the reality of the supply chain, we can map out the pain for a business owner like Dakota over the next, say, 2 years. What does that timeline look like in detail?
We can define 3 pretty distinct phases of impact based on supply chain reality. And it's a pattern we've observed with similar restrictions on, say, telecom hardware.
Okay.
In the first phase, let's call it 0 to 6 months, there's very little visible change. Manufacturers and importers have inventory buffers, and they prioritize fulfilling existing orders with already certified designs. Dakota might still be able to find new units of his current model. It's the calm before the storm, really.
Then the machinery of obsolescence starts grinding around that 6-month mark.
That's the 6 to 12 months phase, and this is where the stress starts to show, and significantly. The certified components, particularly specialized radios and proprietary chipsets, begin their end-of-life cycle. The small, silent revisions that manufacturers need to make become impossible without risking an unauthorized import.
And that's when things start to disappear from the shelves.
Right. Certain certified configurations start disappearing from catalogs, and lead times for spare parts, they stretch dangerously. This is when fleet managers, the people running businesses like Dakota's, they really start to panic about unit repairability.
And the regulatory cliff edge hits around the 1-year mark.
The 12 to 24 months phase. This is when the effects become severe. Aging equipment can no longer be replaced with identical certified models. The whole replacement cycle just breaks down entirely. The risk of trying to import unauthorized gray market drones rises, and with it, the temptation to use unsupported, increasingly brittle software.
So the ecosystem doesn't collapse instantly.
No, it hollows out. It leaves American operators reliant on aging, unsupported technology while the rest of the world just keeps moving on.
Let's pull back slightly and look at the political maneuvering that set this whole ticking clock in motion. This ban wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was the result of a very specific legislative process tied to a deadline.
It was a fascinating case of administrative action being driven by legislative fiat. The 2025 National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, it specifically dictated a procedure. It didn't instantly ban anything.
To set up a condition.
Exactly. It mandated that a U.S. national security agency had to complete a formal security audit of DJI and other covered foreign UAS by a hard deadline, December 23, 2025.
And the rule was, if there's no completed audit by that deadline, they automatically get placed on the FCC covered list.
Precisely. The structure allowed time for a technical review, but if that review was not publicly completed by the deadline, the consequence was automatic designation as an unacceptable risk. And as the deadline arrived, no U.S. agency publicly announced that it had begun or successfully completed the required formal audit.
So the procedural deadline just expired.
It expired, leading directly to the executive branch determination and then the FCC action.
This means the outcome was driven by administrative inaction, or maybe a deliberate process failure, rather than the public disclosure of a specific technical vulnerability or some confirmed spying operation.
Yes. In fact, DJI even publicly urged the U.S. government to conduct the audit, stating they had nothing to hide.
So that's the key distinction. The determination was based on a perceived geopolitical risk and a procedural deadline expiring, not a smoking gun technical report.
That's right. The FCC action cited a broader interagency finding that these systems pose unacceptable risks related to unauthorized surveillance, sensitive data exfiltration, supply chain vulnerabilities, and other potential threats. It's a precautionary national security posture.
One designed to force market separation.
Yes, but the actual mechanism of implementation was purely regulatory attrition. It's a slow squeeze.
This regulatory freezing of the entire ecosystem, it leads us directly to the second major consequence. The sheer economic drag created by intentionally opting out of the best available technology. We are not just losing sales, we are choking off productivity in the billions.
The economic cost is incredibly subtle and I think often misrepresented in the news coverage. If you only focus on the lost drone sales, the $6 to $8 billion per year U.S. industry, you miss the vast majority of the damage.
Because drones aren't a luxury item.
Exactly. They are general-purpose tools that dramatically increase productivity across multiple sectors. The largest economic effect is the lost enabled value.
The value isn't the drone itself, it's the inspection time saved, The labor costs eliminated, the risks reduced, the data gained. It's all the downstream effect.
Exactly. And independent economic estimates, they quantify this enabled value dramatically. Analysis by groups like McKinsey and PwC suggests that commercial drone use contributes roughly $31 to $46 billion per year to the U.S. gross domestic product, the GDP.
Wow. That's a huge number.
It is, and it's all through productivity gains in areas like utility inspection, large-scale surveying, construction monitoring, logistics optimization. So by disrupting the primary tool used for these services, losing even 10% to 20% of that enabled activity, well, that translates immediately into billions of dollars in foregone productivity annually.
And we see this struggle reflected so clearly in the real-world stories of commercial operators, like that farmer you mentioned, Caleb. A third-generation Kansas farmer who had leveraged affordable drone technology to fundamentally change his operation.
Caleb's operation is a perfect example of maximizing enabled value through precision agriculture. He used his fleet not just for flyovers, but for highly advanced autonomous spotting. The drones flew complex, pre-programmed routes, using specialized cameras to identify a single diseased plant leaf or, say, a nutrient deficiency patch in a massive cornfield from 400 feet up.
So instead of the old method, which was polluting and inefficient, just broadcasting chemicals widely across acres, he was performing hyper-efficient spot treatments only where they were absolutely necessary.
And that shift saved him thousands in pesticide costs, it reduced his water usage, and it significantly increased his yields by allowing for that precise intervention. Now, with the hardware he relies on facing obsolescence due to what he calls safety of paperwork, he sees his competitive edge just eroding.
His personal frustration, that feeling that the clock started ticking backward, it's directly measurable in dollars, isn't it?
Absolutely. The higher cost of labor, the higher cost of broadcast chemicals, the lost efficiency from delayed interventions. This is the quantifiable economic cost borne by small business owners.
This story connects directly to a fascinating concept used in policy analysis, which is this idea of safetyism. It sounds like we're not engaging in genuine risk management, but in a kind of bureaucratic safetyism.
That's the precise critique being levied against this action. In policy and academic circles, safetyism describes a cultural impulse where safety, and this includes the feeling of being protected or secure, becomes a sacred value that overrides all other pragmatic or moral concerns.
Concerns like economic efficiency or technological acceleration.
Right. So instead of a cost-benefit analysis that weighs the low, unproven risk of data leakage against the proven massive economic benefit, the decision leans solely on preventing even a theoretical vulnerability.
It's all about eliminating risk, even if the risk is just a potential.
Exactly. Bureaucratic safetyism demands the elimination of anything that cannot be perfectly controlled or 100% guaranteed. And the argument here is that by banning what they cannot perfectly secure, the U.S. government is triggering a great stagnation in autonomous robotics.
We're choosing a protectionist national security narrative over actual technological advancement.
We are. We gain the feeling of being protected from a geopolitical adversary, but we pay an undeniable cost in lost efficiency and innovation. It forces us into a higher cost, slower learning equilibrium.
And the friction created by this choice, it extends beyond just economics. We talked about safety and environmental consequences, the direct consequences of fewer, older, or less capable drones flying.
Right. When unit costs skyrocket, availability becomes sporadic, and the support environment shrinks, inspections get deferred. And for massive critical infrastructure, think high-voltage power lines, wind turbines, bridges, oil and gas pipelines operators will inevitably fly less.
Or they'll use older equipment that's more likely to fail.
Which shifts maintenance from a proactive data-driven system to a reactive fix-it-when-it-breaks model. And that is not where you want to be with critical infrastructure.
Which means more human risk. Drones were the primary tool used to reduce human exposure to all sorts of hazards.
Precisely. The whole safety case for drones was built on replacing humans working at height, entering confined spaces, navigating unstable construction sites, and flying expensive, dangerous, low-altitude manned inspection missions. If high-performance, affordable drones disappear, some of that hazardous work must return to human labor.
Which increases exposure to known high-risk situations across large workforces and over long time frames. It's a step backward in workplace safety.
A big step backward. And the environmental rollback is significant too, especially in something like utility inspection.
Tell me more about that.
Well, you have to consider the displacement effect. Drones replaced highly polluting alternatives. Helicopter inspections burn jet fuel at prodigious rates, often for simple photographic surveys. Ground inspections add vehicle miles and diesel consumption. By slowing the adoption and modernization of drone fleets, we are actively erasing a meaningful share of the emissions savings and efficiency gains that were already being delivered. We are actively slowing the trajectory toward cleaner, more efficient industrial work.
This sounds like a self-inflicted wound that puts the U.S. at a severe global disadvantage. We are consciously opting out of the technology curve.
That is the consequence. It's what we call the global leapfrog effect. Innovation doesn't just stop because the U.S. implements trade restrictions. Manufacturing capacity and iterative improvements, they continue globally. We've seen this pattern with solar panels and electric vehicle batteries.
The restrictions don't halt China's development?
Not at all. They simply refocus their supply chains and accelerate adoption elsewhere. Countries in Europe, Latin America, Asia, they will all continue to deploy higher performance, more affordable drones per dollar invested. They'll capture the productivity gains that the U.S. is intentionally forfeiting. We choose economic independence at a demonstrably higher cost, while the rest of the world chooses technological acceleration.
And this brings us right to the core issue, preventing the rapid adoption of domestic alternatives. This massive performance paradox. If the ban is intended to force the creation of a domestic industry, why can't U.S. companies simply build competing products right now?
It's a question of scale, integration, and fundamental economics. DJI didn't just create a drone, it created an entire fully integrated ecosystem. They own an estimated 70% to 80% of the U.S. civilian market. That ranges from hobbyists all the way to heavy industrial users. Globally, their operational preference is just overwhelming.
I saw a stat on that. It's pretty shocking.
It is. Third-party detection data indicated DJI accounted for 83.48% of all drone detections in 2025 across incredibly diverse operational theaters. That includes civil infrastructure, surveillance, and even conflict zones.
That near 85% detection share is staggering. It means DJI's architecture, its reliability and functionality are effectively the default standard for the entire world.
Exactly. And their dominance stems from vertical integration. They build the airframe, the proprietary camera sensors, the radio links, the batteries, the flight control systems, and the entire software ecosystem all under one roof. This allows them to operate under what you could call consumer electronics economics. High volume, razor-thin margins, and continuous rapid iteration on performance.
And when we look at the domestic alternatives that are supposed to replace this infrastructure, we are shifting immediately to aerospace economics.
That is the crux of the price-performance gap. It's a totally different model. Domestic alternatives are consistently higher cost, often 4 times the price of a comparable DJI unit, and they offer lower volume, narrower mission profiles, and often a fragmented software ecosystem.
The cost of a single, fully compliant, U.S.-made drone can exceed the entire annual drone budget of a small commercial operator.
That's often the case.
And when we talk about this performance gap, we're not just talking about, camera resolution or battery life. We're talking about failure under pressure, where the difference is measured in life and death.
The search and rescue context provides the clearest and I think the most heartbreaking examples of this. Take the account of Marcus, who leads a volunteer search and rescue team in the Sierra Nevada mountains. His team relied for years on high-tier foreign drones for finding lost hikers in really challenging environments.
What were the specs on the equipment they were using that they now can't upgrade or replace?
They used top-of-the-line thermal drones. These were capable of 40-minute flights in high wind, with thermal sensors sensitive enough to spot a human heat signature through a dense forest canopy.
So truly life-saving technology.
Absolutely. These systems were proven reliable, with robust signal links even in deep valleys. But following the new restrictions, they were forced to trial compliant domestic alternatives, which Marcus noted were nearly double the price.
Double the price. Okay, and what were the performance metrics of these compliant drones?
Well, the flight time was halved to around 20 minutes, which is just critical when every second counts during a night search.
You lose half your search time right there.
Immediately. And more critically, the thermal sensors were significantly inferior. Marcus described them as grainy, like looking through a sheer curtain. It made it nearly impossible to distinguish a critical heat signature from background environmental noise. He shared a devastating story of a mission where the signal on the compliant drone just dropped out entirely, right as they were pinpointing a lost child. A failure like that, he said, just would not have happened with his old gear.
To quote Marcus directly, this is the difference between a life saved and a body recovered. We are intentionally choosing a less capable tool for public safety missions, all in the name of political independence.
It's the highest cost of what you might call an anti-accelerationist policy. We're sacrificing the near-term realization of a post-scarcity future, where technology reliably mitigates human risk because we're prioritizing geopolitical control over practical capability. The scarcity is entirely self-imposed.
So if commercial operators are forced to look at these domestic options, what specifically defines an approved drone in the U.S. market right now? How do they know what's compliant?
There are two main security compliance standards they're looking at. The first is the Blue UAS Cleared List, which is maintained and vetted by the Department of Defense.
It says for military and high-level government use.
Primarily, yes. This list is for government and defense applications, which means the platforms meet extremely rigorous security standards but are often very military-centric and therefore extremely expensive.
In the second list.
The second, broader commercial compliance standard is the Green UAS Cleared List. This is run by the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International, or AUVSI. This list aims to provide commercial and public safety users with third-party verification that a drone meets certain cybersecurity and supply chain requirements, but without the necessity of the full DoD vetting process.
What are some examples of these compliant platforms people might be looking at?
For those who need advanced capability, there are platforms like the Skydio X10, which is known for its AI-powered autonomy and superior obstacle avoidance. That's a big one. Companies like FreeFly offer the Astra Prime, which is a highly modular platform designed to be an open ecosystem. And then there's the Teal 2, which is more focused on tactical operations. These platforms are NDAA compliant.
But the critical constraint remains volume and cost. These are built for high-margin, specialized defense, or enterprise niches. They're not built for the mass market that actually drives innovation forward.
Exactly. Even when you combine all of them, the segment where DJI faces significant, if expensive, competition, that high-end inspection and tactical category, it still accounts for less than 20% of their total unit sales.
So for the massive prosumer, agricultural, and entry-level industrial categories that feed the entire innovation pipeline,
there is simply no domestic replacement at the required scale and price point. The innovation pipeline has effectively been blocked.
And this friction is all justified under the umbrella of national security, which leads us to the central question we have to address with granular detail. Is there any verifiable public evidence that DJI is actually spying on the U.S.?
You know, despite years of intense geopolitical scrutiny, warnings from the Department of Homeland Security that go all the way back to 2017, and countless congressional hearings, the public record is clear. No concrete public evidence has ever been presented demonstrating that DJI drones are used for intentional spying or unauthorized data exfiltration.
So the ban is predicated entirely on the potential for risk, not on confirmed malicious activity.
That's right. The security community is operating on a principle of trust, or rather, the lack of trust in the supply chain itself, rather than proof of a technical exploit.
What has DJI done to counter this narrative? They must have pushed back.
They've pushed back consistently. They've commissioned independent audits and implemented numerous security measures to eliminate the possibility of data leakage. For professional users, they offer something called local data mode, or LDM.
Which lets you fly completely offline.
Completely. You can fly missions totally disconnected from the internet. They also employ AES 256 data encryption for all data transmission. And critically, since June of 2024, they explicitly removed automatic flight log syncing for U.S. users. Enterprise customers also have the option to set up on-premises servers, ensuring all their drone data remains within their own secure IT environment.
Let's talk about those independent audits. Verifiable third-party findings are crucial to separate the rhetoric from the reality. Who has actually looked under the hood?
Multiple respected independent organizations have conducted assessments. In 2020, FTI Consulting concluded that configuration options exist to, and I'm quoting here, reduce and eliminate the generation and provision of data externally. Booz Allen Hamilton, also in 2020, found similar vulnerabilities regarding data handling across multiple drone platforms, not uniquely specific to DJI.
And what about government-affiliated testing? Has anyone in the government actually tested these things?
Crucially, yes. The Idaho National Laboratory, or INL, which is a U.S. Department of Energy national laboratory, conducted a limited scope analysis back in 2019 and explicitly concluded they found no data leakage during their testing. And perhaps the most glaring irony came from a leaked Pentagon report in 2021.
I remember this.
It actually cleared the DJI Government Edition drones for use by government entities due to their enhanced security measures. So the policy effectively bans technology that key sections of the U.S. defense apparatus had already internally vetted and approved for their own use.
The ultimate paradox, then, is that the national security controls that were implemented through this NDAA process appear to be actively harming our actual national security preparedness, especially when we look at the reality of modern conflict.
The Ukraine case study is the most vivid and, frankly, painful illustration of this policy backfire. When the U.S. Defense Department mandated its drone programs use only expensive NDAA-compliant components, it dramatically raised the cost and the complexity of the resulting system.
The intention was to create a reliable, trustworthy domestic supply chain.
Right, and the result was a technological failure on the battlefield. Reports from the front lines confirmed that the U.S.-made compliant drones were universally described as expensive, glitchy, and extremely difficult to repair in the field.
But the critical failure was their software agility.
Exactly. The required bureaucratic approval process for software updates and fixes was so slow that it prevented rapid iteration. In a dynamic electronic warfare environment where enemy jamming tactics change daily, a drone needs new countermeasures hourly, not quarterly.
So the U.S. mandated slow, centralized, compliance-driven supply chain just could not possibly keep pace with real-world requirements.
Absolutely not. The bureaucracy was fundamentally anti-accelerationist. The U.S.-made drones quickly became technologically brittle and, frankly, useless against evolving electronic warfare. And the consequence is staggering. Ukraine is now relying on literally tens of thousands of cheap, off-the-shelf Chinese drones, primarily DJI for critical defense operations, reconnaissance, and even targeting.
This illustrates perfectly how digital neo-mercantilism, this idea of protectionist trade policy for digital goods, can deprive the U.S. and its allies of the best, most efficient tools available globally. We are labeling the best tool a threat, only to see our allies depend on that exact tool to survive.
It's the ultimate strategic failure. The policy intended to strengthen the U.S. position is instead depriving us and our partners of necessary technological acceleration. It's forcing us into inefficiency while the supposed adversary provides the functional backbone of our defense.
So, this regulatory move is a structural catalyst. It's intended to reshape the entire U.S. market and force domestic adoption, regardless of the pain. Let's look at the immediate beneficiaries. The domestic winners who are celebrating.
Right. The domestic manufacturers are calling the decision historic. You can see why. It effectively grants them a massive regulatory tailwind by eliminating their most successful global competitor from future innovation cycles.
This isn't market dominance gained through innovation, then?
No, it's dominance achieved through government policy.
Who are the companies positioned to benefit the most? And how are their connections underscoring the claim that this is really just industrial strategy dressed up as national security?
We can start with companies like Brints in Seattle, which focuses heavily on public safety and tactical response drones. They immediately position themselves as the ready and compliant alternative, but the political connections, they reveal the deeper forces at play. Take Skydio, a leading U.S. drone firm. They are strategically positioned to benefit greatly, and notably, Skydio hired a man named Joe Bartlett. He was the former national security advisor to the lead author of the very NDAA bill that created this deadline.
So the advisor to the author of the bill?
Yes. Bartlett served as their federal policy director before moving into an assistant deputy secretary role at the Department of Commerce, which is an agency directly involved in the interagency decision-making that led to the FCC action.
That is the definition of political influence translating directly into regulatory outcome. The person advising on the legislation then moves to the company that benefits from the legislation and then into the department implementing the decision.
That sequence of events strongly suggests this policy is serving as industrial strategy. And we also see Unusual Machines, a Florida-based components manufacturer. Their strategy highlights a reliance on high-profile political visibility, with Donald Trump Jr. serving on their board.
So these connections are intended to leverage political capital.
To maintain and accelerate this favorable regulatory environment, yes.
So while the big players are leveraging their political connections, the community that actually relies on this technology isn't standing idle. We're seeing a fascinating counter-response from developers who are focused on technological autonomy.
That movement is a direct response to this kind of centralized gatekeeping. When the state can just flip a switch and turn a piece of hardware into a liability, the only way forward for technological evolution is decentralization.
This brings us to the story of Sarah, a software developer in Seattle who spent years working on open-source flight controllers. She saw the ban not as a defeat, but as a confirmation that progress has to be decoupled from politics.
Sarah realized that if national security can be defined so arbitrarily by bureaucratic deadlines, then the only true security lies in what she calls a decentralized, sovereign tech stack. She's now part of this community, the Ghost Flyers engineers who are building and operating their own hardware from scratch. They're focusing on open-source flight firmware, localized encryption, and peer-to-peer networks that completely bypass federal certification and gatekeeping.
This is a radical push for technological autonomy. They view the drone not as a regulated product, but as an essential extension of human intelligence, and they reject the idea that its evolution should require a government permit.
It's the ultimate protest against bureaucratic stagnation. They believe that innovation has to be independent of state control. They are literally seeking to ensure the continued evolution of autonomous robotics, even if it means operating outside the traditional regulatory framework imposed by Washington.
And this desire for autonomy, it leads directly to another source of immediate regulatory chaos, which is DJI's own strategic move to remove geofencing from its products.
This was a brilliant, highly political power play on their part. For years, lobbyists had argued that DJI's mandatory geofencing feature, the thing that prevents drones from flying near airports or critical infrastructure, was actually a national security threat.
How is that a threat?
The argument was that if DJI could remotely prevent drones from flying, then they could also potentially force them to attack critical infrastructure. Or, at the very least, they maintain an unacceptable level of control over U.S. airspace.
So DJI removed the feature to disarm that specific lobbying argument. They essentially said, okay, we're taking away our ability to control this remotely. The onus of compliance is now squarely on the pilot.
Exactly. But the problem is, geofencing, despite its frustrations for professional pilots who needed to request unlocks, it served as a crucial set of training wheels for the vast, uneducated hobbyist market, the people who just go to Best Buy. It prevented them from accidentally or ignorantly flying illegally over 400 feet near fire zones or into restricted airspace.
The removal of those technical guardrails immediately threatens to create a drone Wild West.
It does. I mean, given that an estimated 80% of the current U.S. market is using DJI drones, this change has massive immediate consequences. The lack of centralized technical control means that the fight for airspace safety now shifts violently to local regulation,
which the FAA has jurisdiction over.
The FAA maintains sole jurisdiction over navigable airspace, yes, but that won't stop local authorities, cities, counties, states from trying to pass a confusing, complicated patchwork quilt of ugliness.
A patchwork quilt of local ordinances, permits, and height restrictions that would create impossible compliance issues for commercial pilots operating across different jurisdictions.
It would be a complete nightmare for people like Dakota who might fly over 3 different counties in a single day inspecting a power line. Compliance would become untenable, and that would further slow down economic productivity.
So if the community, the commercial operators, the public safety teams, the developers, if they want to fight back against this patchwork quilt and a potential future, more comprehensive ban, where is their leverage point right now?
Their leverage point is active right now. It's through the Department of Commerce's Advance Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, or ANPRM. This is not a bill, but it is a vital federal outreach effort. It has 50 extensive, detailed questions about drone risks, critical infrastructure dependencies, and the economic impact of security compliance.
And the deadline to engage with this, to submit public comments and data, is crucial.
The deadline is March 4th. This is the community's chance for effective, documented lobbying. The Commerce Department is seeking public opinion to inform future regulations, and the resulting record of public comments is often used in subsequent litigation and legislative battles.
So this is where they make their case.
This is it. Operators must document and quantify their reliance on high-performance equipment for public goods search and rescue, fighting wildfires, efficient farming. They need to articulate, in hard numbers, why the proposed ban sacrifices public safety and economic efficiency for a theoretical security game.
Okay, let's bring this all together. We've analyzed the mechanisms of attrition, the economic friction that's costing us billions, the life and death consequences of the performance gap, and the political industrial strategy that seems to be driving all of this.
We are witnessing a high-stakes conflict where the U.S. has structurally determined to rebuild an industry by creating a high-cost, protected environment. This FCC action is a durable structural catalyst intended to force that market separation. However, the current reality shows that protectionism often just creates scarcity, and it sacrifices the technological acceleration required for societal efficiency.
So the U.S. has chosen a higher cost, slower learning equilibrium in the name of independence. The ultimate test will be whether the domestic industry, fortified by these regulatory tailwinds, can close that dramatic performance and scale gap fast enough to justify this immense short-term cost.
A cost that's being absorbed by farmers, first responders, and small commercial operators all across the country.
Exactly.
And if those domestic alternatives cannot deliver competitive products on price, on performance, and on volume within the next 2 years, then the U.S. will have simply imposed a debilitating economic friction upon itself, one that benefits our global competitors who continue to operate with the world's best available tools.
This ban is a clear signal that the U.S. is willing to pay a premium in dollars, productivity, and risk for independence, even if the tools they must rely on today are demonstrably inferior to the technology they just labeled a threat. It forces a wider, more provocative thought for you. If the most effective defense, emergency response, and commercial operations rely on technology provided by the perceived adversary, does security in the 21st century now mean accepting interdependence rather than pursuing costly, often inefficient independence?